So, yeah, thank you so much all for joining us today. I will be your lecturer for today, taking you through mitigation and adaptation measures for climate change. So this is our second session, and this is definitely brought to you by BAF Research and Climate Change Action. I had introduced myself, and I'm happy for us to interact during this section. If there's a possibility for anyone to contribute, with questions and answers, well and good. If I'm able to ask a question and you're able to unmute and possibly contribute, that is very much welcome. So in today's lecture, our main objectives is to identify and evaluate climate change mitigation strategies and also to explain climate change adaptation approaches. So to begin with, we need to understand what climate mitigation is. And basically, these are measures that are taken by either individuals or businesses to reduce or prevent greenhouse gases or to enhance carbon sinks that remove these particular greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. So mitigation measures are basically ways in which we prevent, climate change conditions. And I would actually like for us to understand this term better through taking up a case study of, for example, Kenya, where I come from. So in Kenya, we have, I will just take, we have Kenya's nationally determined contributions, which are basically, so the nationally determined contributions is one of Kenya's mitigation measures towards, actually both mitigation and adaptation, but we'll come to adaptation later. Basically that seeks to reduce or abate greenhouse gases emissions by 32% by 2030. So in line with the Sustainable Development Agenda, it is Kenya's mandate to make sure that there is low carbon and climate, resilient, through a development pathway. So there are various ways in which, Kenya, through the nationally determined contributions, enact, various mitigation strategies. And that is one through renewable energy. Two is through tree cover. Kenya has an aspiration of attaining about 10% of forest cover. However, there has been some reports that, we have surpassed that already, and we already have like a 12% forest cover. And the other mitigation measure under the nationally determined contribution is scaling up nature-based solutions. The fourth one is contribution to REDD+ activities. So basically, this is afforestation and protecting forests or green spaces. And then there is a low carbon transport system where, there are various, especially private investors who are now having solutions when it comes to motorcycles and having them use, electricity. So that way to have low carbon transport emission. And then there is smart agriculture and the sustainable waste management system. So basically, these are strategies within the nationally determined contributions that enable Kenya to mitigate climate change, basically to prevent any occurrences for climate change. So having understood that and having that as a case study, we will now look at the various mitigation strategies that we will possibly talk more about during the lecture. Not to worry, we're going to be speaking also about adaptation, and we're going to be able to determine the differences between mitigation and adaptation. So on key strategies, we have number one, which is renewable energy adoption. And this is mainly done through adoption of solar, wind power, geothermal power. These are clean and green sources of energy that do not or emit little of the greenhouse gases. We realize the greenhouse gases are, CO2, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous dioxide. So these are the common greenhouse gases that contribute to warming of the Earth's surface. During the initial lecture, we had gone through the process of how greenhouse gases contribute to climate change. And then the other one is energy efficiency improvement. And this, when we look at, for example, lighting, we need to adopt lighting that consumes less energy. So using, energy efficient bulbs, for example, for lighting, reducing the amount of time we need to, have our lights on. For example, during the day, you don't need to have your lights on. You can utilize natural sunlight. And that actually brings it to green buildings. So lately, architectures or building designers have been encompassing energy efficient, materials in their construction, allowing also, maximizing natural light, just so that you don't have to turn on your bulb during the day. So these are various ways of having, energy efficient appliances and lighting that, reduces emission of greenhouse gases. And not to forget industrial processes where instead of, for example, using fossil fuel or using DSL to run an industry, it is well and good to, have other sources like solar energy to be the sole provision of, say, lighting in your institution. So those are various ways of energy efficiency improvements. And the other mitigation strategies are on sustainable transportation. So recently, Kenya has been having various initiatives or drives towards electric vehicles and also electric motorcycles or motorbikes. We've seen various investors or various people in the private sector introducing new models of motorbikes that actually use, electricity instead of consuming fossil fuel. And this is just one way of, transitioning from the old non-green gas to green and more eco-friendly energy. And the other one is expanding public transportation. So people adopting more public transport as opposed to everyone driving to work. It's better to have efficient public transport so that, there's really less traffic and less volume of transportation modes on the road. And talking about cycling and walking is also just one other way of ensuring that we're not contributing to greenhouse gases emission through utilization of fossil fuel. And then there's encouraging use of biofuels and hydrogen fuels. Biofuels are more greener and more eco-friendly, considered, as to compared to fossil fuels. And so it is advisable, or one way of mitigating climate change is through use of biofuels and use of hydrogen fuel. The other mitigation strategy is on reforestation and afforestation. Here is where we talk about the REDD+. reduction of emission and making sure that we are protecting green spaces and making sure that we are, adding value to the already existing green spaces. This way we are, creating carbon sequestration and so, preventing emissions, or rather preventing greenhouse gases. So we all know how forests contribute to, absorption of CO2, storing it, and that is one way of, reducing greenhouse gases through carbon sequestration. And another is also still talking about reforestation and afforestation. Protecting existing forests is very important, that we are not, cutting down trees and contributing to deforestation. And also supporting agroforestry and sustainable land management is one way of restoring, our green spaces. Another mitigation measure is sustainable agriculture and land use. So when we talk about climate smart agriculture techniques, is where we're either utilizing, less water, less energy to run our farms. And if at all there is, emission of methane, which we cannot actually avoid, especially for livestock keeping, we need to make sure that this methane is just not emitted or into the atmosphere. However, it is tapped and utilized to produce fuel. We all know that, methane has almost 80 times the effect of CO2. So if we burn methane to release CO2, water, and energy, it is much more effective as a matter of reducing the effect of greenhouse gases as compared to letting it, emitting it into the atmosphere. So it is very important that for those that keep livestock, that they maximize, converting some of these gases to cleaner or greener solutions. And then promoting organic farming and reducing pesticide use. Pesticides are one of those media of nitrous dioxide. And so it is very important that we reduce the use of pesticides and practice more of organic farming and use of manure. Other mitigation strategies are waste management and circular economy. Kenya recently adopted the Sustainable Development, the Waste Management Sustainable Development Act, Sustainable Waste Management Act, 2022, that, is now inhabiting the linear way of disposal of waste into a more circular way of from reducing waste to reusing to recycling. And only items that are not either reduced, reused, or recycled are the ones that are being disposed. However, they need to be disposed in the appropriate manner. So this helps, Kenyans, or rather the waste management companies and waste disposal companies, to be able to maximize the waste that they collect. And then there is promoting composting and biodegradable materials. This is still under waste, and the 70% of waste that is generated by Kenyans is made of organic waste. And organic waste is valuable. There is a bit of this waste that can be used to make animal feed. There's some that can be used to make manure, and even to an extent of producing energy. So promoting composting and biodegradable materials is very effective in ensuring that we're not releasing or allowing methane and CO2 to be emitted into the atmosphere. However, we need to reutilize the materials from, either composting or utilizing through energy. And under still waste management, it is very important to reduce plastic use and improve waste to energy technologies. Just as the previous point, organic waste contributes in a very great manner to, efficient energy technologies. And then the other mitigation strategy is on creating a supportive environment, for investors. Here we're talking about policies and regulations. I just mentioned the Sustainable Waste Management Act 2022, which is, promoting more circular way of handling wastes. And through these efforts, I think Kenya has been providing incentives to, waste management companies, just so that they're able to bring in machinery to be able to recycle waste. So those are some of the ways of mitigating climate change. I hope we are together until there. I'm not sure if anyone can speak to confirm that, but I hope we are together until there. So when it comes to climate change adaptation, this is basically adjusting to actual or expected climate conditions. When we talk about mitigation, we are preventing climate change conditions. However, when we talk about adaptation, we are adjusting to whatever conditions that have been created so that we can, it is ideal for us to either live in these particular situations or lessen the impact of climate change in these situations. So this actually depends, with various geographical location, the level of risk when it comes to this, climate change effect, and also available resources. But I hope we're able to differentiate between adaptation and mitigation. Mitigation, we are preventing, so we are, either adapting renewable energy, either we are growing trees or creating forest or reforestation and afforestation. We are conserving whatever we already have in terms of forest cover. We are using, we are going through smart agriculture and stuff like that. While in adaptation, we are adapting to, or rather we are adjusting to already created climatic effects or conditions in a sustainable way. So this can either be, planting drought-resistant crops, because, if the drought already exists, we need to have measures on how we are going to live within these drought conditions. And one is through, growing drought-resistant crops. Another one could be finding solutions. Instead of growing crops, you can keep bees. Do beekeeping to have, honey. When it comes to flooding, you have to build, flood-resistant homes. So we're already experiencing, in adaptation, we're already experiencing these climatic conditions, climate change conditions, and we are adapting or adjusting to them. I hope that is very clear. So on adaptation strategies, there are various ways in which, like we said, there are various ways in which we can adapt to these changing climatic conditions. And one is through agriculture and food security. Africa, or if I come to Kenya, our major economical contribution is agriculture. We depend a lot on agriculture, either for export or to feed ourselves. We export a lot of tea, coffee, avocado, yeah, but we also consume a lot of maize, potatoes. So agriculture is a very important sector for Kenya, and I think for the rest of East Africa, other than those that are, located in drier locations. So for any agriculture within the drought regions or the dry regions, the ASAL regions, use of drought resistant and fast maturing crop varieties is very important. So myself, I come from western part of Kenya. We receive averagely good enough annual rainfall. However, from what I used to know, my area would mainly cultivate millet and sorghum as either subsistent crop. And this was mainly because these crops would grow even unattended to. All you need to do is just grow it, weed it, and it will grow. Our soils were very rich then, so there was no need really to add fertilizer as people add now. So it was very ideal for us, and it's still ideal for us to actually grow millet and sorghum because they're drought resistant. You don't have to water them. All you need to do is just grow, weed them when time is right, and they will grow to maturity and give you good harvests. However, this only happens in good soils that have not been degraded. Right now, soils are degraded so much that most farmers now are only growing maize a lot. And also for them to have sustainable yields, they have to use fertilizers. So it is way easier for an old farmer to actually grow drought-resistant crops that are adapted to grow in these particular regions, as opposed to growing maize that is very dependent on rain and also dependent on fertilizer. And then there are under still agriculture and food security, it is very important to practice conservation agriculture techniques, and that includes mulching, crop rotation. Crop rotation is very ideal because if you keep growing one crop on a farm for a long period of time, your soil gets degraded, especially if it's a crop like maize, where there's no, reintroduction of nitrogen into the soil. The soil easily gets degraded, worse even if you're using fertilizers. So it is very ideal to implement conservation agriculture techniques and, having both also intercropping and having, agroforestry in your farm. That way you are creating ideal conditions for your farm to have better produce. And then improving irrigation efficiency through drip irrigation and rainwater harvesting. I think gone are the days where we would just irrigate without proper measures. Right now, drip irrigation is very ideal, and people are utilizing more of rainwater to water their crops. And it is also very efficient to strengthen early warning systems for farmers. For us, this is done through extension agronomists, or even through the meteorological department that gives alerts now and again to farmers in regards to, either rains or drought, to help farmers in planning for their either planting, harvesting, and all that. So this is one ideal way of adapting to climate conditions through, agriculture and food security. And then another way is other strategies for water resources is improve water conservation and management practices. So we have to make sure that when we receive rain, we harvest this rainwater, and that this rainwater will be ideal at a time when there will be no rains. And then develop alternative water resources. This is harvesting rainwater is actually one of them. Desalination for those who live in areas where there's salty water. And then to restore and protect watersheds and wetlands. Various conservationists or conservation organizations aim to protect our watersheds and wetlands. In Kenya, most of our forests or gazetted forests are within our wetlands or places that enables relief rainfall. And this is the examples are like Aberdare, which is very ideal for us to take care or to conserve. And then promote community-based water governance. Other strategies for adaptation include strategies for human health, and that we need to strengthen healthcare systems to respond to climate related diseases, and also to improve access to clean drinking water and sanitation. I think for most, drought prone areas, they suffer a lot from effects of climate change, and not just the humans alone, even animals. And in Kenya, for example, in the northeastern parts, they depend a lot on livestock, which is, their way of, economical well-being. However, it is very ideal that there's proper response to, effects of climate change on either humans or animals. And so far we've seen, insurance options being offered to livestock keepers for themselves and even for their livestock. So it is ideal to strengthen healthcare systems just so as to be able to abate any, climate-related diseases or effects. And then it is ideal to raise awareness on heat stroke prevention and emergency preparedness. I think heat stroke is more common. The last I had was in India. But again, also here, especially in drought areas, temperatures would go high. However, I believe communities that live in these particular areas have adapted ways in which, they can be able to accommodate such harsh weather conditions. And then other adaptation strategies are for infrastructure and settlements. It is very ideal to build climate resilient infrastructure. Kenya last year received very, if I may call it, we had a very bad flooding experience, and this was experienced all around the country, from Nairobi to the western parts of Kenya, to the coastal parts of Kenya. And it caused deaths, and very many households were affected in various ways, in one way or another. And it made the government more aware of being able to build up proper drainage systems, and most importantly within the urban areas. Urban areas are very highly populated, and structures come along now and again, and without, proper management of how construction is done, yeah, some of these buildings end up being on, pathways for water, or being in the swampy areas basically where water is supposed to be let to settle. So we learned the hard way, and we invested on building proper drainage systems just so as to abate effects of flooding. And it is also ideal to have or implement urban planning measures to reduce, any of these disaster risks, and promote energy efficient and disaster risk resistant buildings. Another strategy is on for livestock, and improving animal management practices is very ideal. This has had various controversial inputs where, the government would like to help farmers to either vaccinate animals so that they're able to adapt to this kind of situations. However, some farmers are not very welcoming to that because they are used to, the natural way of caring for their animals. So the best way is to, see if at all the vaccines are healthy, and that vaccinated animals can actually go through past some diseases and past some drought conditions, then other farmers will be able to see the benefit of that for them to be able to also join a vaccination program. And then there is regular, I just mentioned vaccination, and then storage of fodder is very important and very ideal. In my village, during rainy seasons, we have lots of produce. So for example, people now cultivate a lot of maize. And after the rains or after harvesting, we are always keeping, the maize stalks, because we know that there's going to be a time when it is going to be hot and dry, and there will be no fodder and there will be no pasture for animals. So whatever we had kept from our farms in terms of maize stock, this is what we will use during this dry season to feed our livestock. So it's important to feed, to store fodder for use during drought periods. And then one other measure is community-based adaptation. And this is mainly encompassing traditional knowledge integration. I would actually love to hear from any of you if you know of any, have any traditional knowledge or indigenous knowledge on how, climate change has been either mitigated or adapted in your communities. Myself, I know that in my community, it is ideal for us to grow millet and sorghum as one way of having drought-resistant crops and being assured of an harvest, whether rains come or rains fail to come. So that is something that I've seen through, generations and generations. And those of us who do not grow maize actually lean on millet and sorghum. I wonder what indigenous knowledge or what traditional knowledge is there to any of you or in your communities on how, you adapt to climate change conditions. I don't know if is someone able to probably maybe unmute and contribute to that.
Okay, hi, my name is Beatrice from Kenya.
Yes, hi Beatrice.
Hi, I come from a community from eastern part of Kenya, that is Kamba.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, specifically I come from Makueni County. And mostly what we do is that we know our rains there are not so promising every season in and out. So the farmers have adopted the use of planting drought-resistant crops like maga beans, that is ndengu, to at least make sure that the community receives some harvest using the short rains. So yeah, we've adapted using drought-resistant crops like ndengu. That's it. I think that is one.
Yeah, thanks so much, Beatrice. That is actually one way of adapting to climate change, growing crops that would ideally, we will still receive a harvest whether rains come or rains fail to come. So that's good. Can someone else is someone else able to also unmute and let us know of any kind of traditional knowledge that they apply in their everyday life just to adapt to climate change?
Hello?
Hello?
You can hear me? My name is Gladys. You can hear me?
Yes, Gladys.
Yeah, thank you very much for a very informative presentation and from the examples you have given. I also wanted to add that in my community, we have learned to of course, plant drought-resistant crops, but also manage the post-harvest. How do we store our food that we harvest during the bumper season in preparation for a drought? So we plant things like sweet potatoes. You will be surprised that sweet potatoes can actually be sliced and dried under the sun and kept well to be consumed in the next season when there is drought. These sweet potatoes are sliced just like cassava, the way you slice cassava and dry, then sweet potatoes we slice and dry completely. We can then turn that sweet potato into flour. We mix with sorghum and with maybe tamarind, indicas, fruits. You make what do you call it? Ugali. Okay.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then also we have learned to dry green vegetables, greens, things like, I don't know, you call the seeds of cowpeas, like ball. We know
Yeah,
how to
call it
dry
so.
it, and we can really dry and store it in big sacks and ready for consumption during dry season. You just never know. You could have a bumper harvest this year, and then there's poor harvest next year. So you store, and then things like cucumber. There's the indigenous cucumber. We grow it. We harvest the seeds. We also dry the seeds, and then other than the seeds, the body of the cucumber, the flesh, we dry it in anticipation. It stays for a year or two without getting spoiled. All those things I have enumerated can stay. I think that if people can get exposure to knowing how to dry food post-harvest and store them properly, that could also help us in managing drought and hunger during drought. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gladys. That was very elaborate. I like the idea of, post-harvest management because very many farmers in Kenya lose, harvest because they're not able to sell in time. And so it is very ideal that you have proper ways of managing harvest so that you can either keep them and store them for later. I think someone else wants to speak. Please go ahead.
Hello?
Yes.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I'm also contributing from Kenya. I'm Professor Malit.
Mm-hmm.
I come from Homa Bay County. Normally what we are trying to do what we call a community empowerment. by teaching them on how we can do what we call crop production improvements. You can hear me?
Yes.
Then we also do livestock production improvement. We crossbreed them. When we crossbreed them, we get a variety that are drought resistant, disease resistant, and something like that one. And then we are also trying to teach them on how to do what we call intercropping. We intercrop crops with the trees that are able to, trees called nitrogen fixation trees, so that you see now there is the flow of nitrogen from the air into the soil. At the same time, we also teach them on how we can harvest water. So most of them, at least every home has a tank. So they are keeping water for future use when during dry period. And at the same time, we also engage the community and the local administration so that we dig some wells where we can channel the runoff water to collect into those wells so that we can be able to use them in future. I think that is what I'm seeing we are doing in my area. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for your contribution. Actually, you just even mentioned the other point on capacity building. When you mentioned about training people with the water harvesting and all that. And that is basically contributing to, training community members in ways on how they're able to adapt to climate effects. So yeah, thank you for that contribution. So we've seen various ways in how we can have both capacity building and also have traditional knowledge integration to be able to, adapt to various climatic change situations. And then others are ecosystem-based adaptation, where we are protecting our natural ecosystem. So, for example, in the coastal parts in Kenya, there are various community initiatives for community members to participate in either reclaiming mangroves or reforesting these particular mangrove spaces, or basically just caring for the mangrove, uprooting weeds and managing these mangrove areas so that they're able to actually grow to maturity. And mangroves are very important because they are one of the ways in which we control flooding, or even control seawater from getting into the mainland. So it's very ideal to have ecosystem-based adaptation. During last lecture, we talked about pitfalls, or we talked about digging holes to collect water and have these spaces that have collected water during rainy seasons to grow shrubs or grow grass that can be able to feed livestock during the drought season. So there are various ecosystem-based adaptation that we can be able to implement in our communities to be able to adapt to already existing climatic conditions. And then policy and advocacy is very important. In Kenya, we have various regulation measures and policies around climate adaptation and even climate mitigation measures. And it is very ideal that these policies also inform regulation that are also that will contribute into climate mitigation and adaptation. And then now on developing climate adaptation action plans, which will be almost the closure of this lecture. And a climate adaptation plan is a structured approach to reducing vulnerability and increasing resilience to climate change impacts. So there are various stakeholders that can be involved, to assess risks, implement strategies that are tailored to particular, local localities, and then also to monitor these particular actions that have been tailored in these localities, just to make sure that they are working, and that if it's not working, there are there are alternatives, or there are ways in which we can measure progress. So the process of climate adaptation action plan include assessing climate risks. This way you're able to identify what are the threats in that particular area, and then you need to identify the vulnerable groups, people who will be most affected by either who are most affected by the impacts or effects of climate change. And then select adaptation strategies, where you're selecting the best measures to be able to address these particular threats, and then implementing monitoring and adaptation plans. So here I would possibly talk about I would have Kenya's national adaptation plan as a case study. So the Kenya National Adaptation Plan 2015 to 2030 is basically a policy document that was developed to guide the country's efforts in adaptation. And it is part of Kenya's commitment under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And there are various areas that, the plan indicates measures for adapting to climate change. And one is agriculture. We talked about agriculture. The other one is water resources, human health or animal health, infrastructure, forestry, tourism. When we talk about tourism, we mainly are referring to ecotourism, where people would visit either, a conservation area, contribute to conservation of particular, endangered species. Yeah, and then there's also inclusion of gender, youth, and the marginalized groups. I think lately we've heard of any areas where any particular space where people are talking about climate adaptation, there needs to be representation of a youth, marginal and a marginalized, groups, and also just make sure that both genders or all genders are included in these particular discussions, because climate change affects people differently. It affects marginalized societies or groups way more. It affects youths more, and it affects women more. I think that is something that we can talk about in other lectures on how, climate change affects women or children or youth or the marginalized communities. So it is very important that we include all these people in each and every milestone on climate adaptation. So with the Kenya's National Adaptation Plan, it is a roadmap for integrating climate adaptation into national and county level development. So in Kenya, every county has their own, determined strategies on how to adapt to climate change. And that applies also to the national level. And in all this, these plans need to support ecosystem-based and community-driven solutions. So whenever we're creating solutions, we have to make sure that, people who are most affected by climate change are also involved in determining what the threats or the risks are, and also included in implementation of the strategies that are going to help to either, abate these particular climatic conditions. That is all for today's lecture. I hope we've all have had the understanding of what climate mitigation and climate adaptation is. We know the various measures or strategies for climate adaptation and also for climate mitigation. Thank you all so much.